and then you look at the situation going on within our economy and stuff. One of the things I think is very interesting is that consumers seem to be forgotten in this particular economy. And every time you turn around, I just was laughing because one of these dudes was telling me, matter of fact, I think you mentioned one time that you looked at your bill and you saw some charges on there that you never saw. So as these companies are trying to balance their books on the back of the everyday American, one of the things that we actually talked about, or actually are going to be talking about, is an article that we were looking at in USA Today. And if you want to kind of give an outline of it, that'll be cool, and we'll just rap about it.
Yeah, it's interesting, on the heels of credit card reform, everybody's thinking, oh, we have people to save the day, and then there's new charges cropping up, and specifically what you're talking about is the charges that banks have been issuing on individuals for overdraft protection, or overdraft charges, and the amount of money that they've made out of it is astronomical. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I'm sure everybody looks at it on an individual basis if you bounce a check here and there, or you may know that it happens to quite a few people, but the numbers they're talking about is this year in 2009, they're expecting it to be about $39 billion.
They get $39 billion the banks have made in fees. In fees.
Yes, and that's up just 6%. So it's already, last year it was a considerable chunk of change that they made off of it. But the ironic thing about it, or, the unfortunate thing about it, is that, again, like you said, it's on the backs of the little guy, because the individuals who are bouncing checks are the ones who can ill afford to lose the money, and the charges that they're incurring are way above and beyond what they, not only what they have to begin with, but what they're going to wind up having to pay with afterwards. For example, they mentioned that an individual, if you bounce a check for $20 and then you get a $27 bank fee,
Exactly.
figure out the percentage increase, that you have for that so-called quote-unquote loan.
Okay, so for the people to understand that, if you use your credit card, your debit card, for example, you go and you purchase something and you don't have enough money in your account, the bank charges you a fee, an overdraft fee. Now, this has changed. The policy used to be that the banks wouldn't do that they wouldn't do an overdraft fee. But then some people kind of sat down and looked at this thing and said, well, maybe we should be doing it because this could be a new revenue stream for these banks.
And that's the thing. They had some consulting firms that actually formulated these ideas and got a percentage of how much, how successful the idea turned out to be, and it turned out to be wildly successful. But, and like you said, originally banks, what they would do is they would say, well, you'd get that denial, somebody give you back your card, or, if you went to the money machine, they would tell you, you don't have enough insufficient funds. Now they're actually giving you the money, and I think that's ironic. It's bad enough when you're using your debit card, but they're actually giving you the money that you don't have from your money machine card, and then charging you the overdraft charge afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things, and I think I mentioned it to you one time, that I was mad at my particular bank because I had put in a check a week before I even wrote these other checks, and they held the larger check and didn't deposit and cash it, against the account. And I was like, what are y'all trying to do? And then tried to charge me an overdraft fee, which I fought them on and I won. So a lot of times when we look at these things, people think that they can fight against the system, but based on what we saw in the article, the system has been set up so that it's going to maximize the bank's biggest, opportunity to make money off of you.
Yeah, and as we've seen with credit card reform, these practices can go on for years upon years before we have a president or a congressman or somebody who actually makes an issue of it enough for change to occur. So it's something that people really have to pay attention to and make sure that they're watching how much money they're losing as a result of this. Because as long as it's legal, they can do it. And although, nobody wants to bounce a check, if you do, it used to be bouncing a check was an error. I didn't balance my statement, or I didn't, balance my register to figure out, that I didn't have enough money in there. But now it really is, it's become so prevalent that people are bouncing that they were able to look at it and say how much money they were making. The article talked about the fact that out of the smaller balances, the individuals who can ill afford to lose this money, that 10% of the overdraft charges are from those people, and it's making 40% of the revenue that they're generating. So imagine that.
Now think about that for a second, people. There's a certain percentage of people that most of the time, a lot of these people didn't even have bank accounts. Now they have a bank account, right? And they're living from paycheck to paycheck, and they're bouncing the check. And then they're taking all of this money. Like I think there was one example where some guy bounced a check, and then I think they charged him $600 in in fees or whatever for a check that they bounce. So the banks are making their profits. You know, the money that gets put into your Wall Street 401ks or whatever. This is how they're making their profits, off the backs of people that can ill afford it. And when you have individual citizens that are struggling to make, like the girl said that I bounced a check because, hey, my check was smaller than I expected, and then I had to pay all these extra fees or whatever. If it doesn't help this economy, it doesn't help consumers if we have the people that are working at the bottom suffering.
Yeah, and similar to your situation, a practice that one of the banks I think even admitted to was the fact that they can hold a check, you know, and decide which check they're going to have clear and which one they aren't. So they were holding they were actually paying the larger checks to get rid of all the money so that all the smaller checks that came in that would have cleared now would not clear, and you'd have more bounce charges. I think a woman had 17 overdraft charges that amounted to something in the range of $600 as well. So I mean, and I think they might have reimbursed her $200, but you know, $400 in bounce charges is still ridiculously large.
Right, and see, the thing is though, Congress is aware of this. They're aware of the situation, and from what I understand, the banks are aware that Congress is aware, and so they've already started their campaign. See, we as consumers are asleep at the wheel because we don't check our statements. 2, we don't speak up, we don't complain. And 3, we don't get our Congress people involved in the situation. The banks have already invested money in lobbying the Congress to make sure that they don't change these rules.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about the amount of revenue. If we're having credit card reform over the fact that we think that that's gotten out of hand, and I think credit cards were generating or are expected to generate about $20 billion, and now you're talking about almost double that, 38, 39 billion in this other overdraft revenue generated for the bank. That's a bigger, as big or even bigger issue in terms of how it's going to impact the general public.
And see, and of course what happened, because people they don't want to use credit cards, so they're using their debit cards, taking the money out of the accounts that they have. And so that's common sense. That's good business practices. And you would think that the banks will reward people that are trying to only spend the amount of money they actually have in the bank and not take it and use it on a credit card to get behind and can't make their payments. So these banks are out there finding nefarious ways again to make profit off of the consumers. And the thing that I find most ridiculous about this, Lorie, is these banks got what from us? What did they get from us just in the beginning of this year? They got a bailout.
Oh, yeah.
These banks got a
They got
bailout.
our money, and now they're taking it back. They're taking twice as much, right?
They're going to pay us back for the money they're charging us on these overdraft fees and stuff like that. They got billions of dollars to stay afloat so they can screw the consumer and stuff.
Yeah, and there has to be a certain level of responsibility on the part of the consumer, because we have to look at the fact that if this is something that they're legally allowed to do, then now we just have to buckle down and be more responsible about balancing our registers and seeing how much money you have. If you don't have any money, don't act like, you know, okay, I'll just borrow on it, because that's how a lot of these rackets in terms of borrowing against your paycheck, you know, a week ahead of time, that's how they're succeeding. They're having people who can't afford, if you run out of money between paychecks and then you borrow against the next paycheck, you're just going to be on a vicious cycle over and over again. So you have to kind of look at it and do whatever you need to do to become a more responsible consumer.